Welcome to Gearbox TV and the latest instalment of my 996 Carrera diary, where this is happening. Afternoon, welcome to Gearbox TV, welcome back to Right Tune, as I said, where Little Irish is on the ramp. And let's face it, this is probably the video that you've been waiting 5 years for, because I've been to Right Tune a lot with Little Irish, but this is the first time the flat six engine has been out. You could argue it's been a long time coming. 150,000 miles on this car now, 71 of which I've done in the last 4.5 years. So it's definitely hashtag driven, not hidden. It is a bit like Trigger's broom. It's had a lot of new parts, but as I said, we've never had to take the engine out. We did intimate in the last video that my luck might be about to run out. We'd identified it needed a new crank position sensor. I elected to hold that work off for a little while because the guys said your engine's probably going to need to come out to do that. Now, half the internet at that point got onto the comments and was smashing around the keyboard saying, you don't need to take the engine out to do the crank position sensor. Well, I'm going to show you why we did and why the guys at Right Tune were correct to issue the advice all along. So, it's the old adage, isn't it? At that point, once the engine does come out, it kind of opens a can of worms, and this is kind of where it gets expensive, because it's a case of, well, while the engine's out, while you're in there, which I'm sure we've all heard from specialists in previous years, you might as well do some other bits that are preventative. It does mean that in the short term, i.e. today, it's going to be expensive, and it's for that reason I've got my running shoes on, by the way, for when Chris passes the bill a bit later. But yeah, look, doing that sort of work now will mean that in 6 months' time, for example, the engine's not going to need to come out again, or the gearbox is going to have to be dropped out for other bits and pieces. Before we continue the video though, so Chris and Joe and I are going to have a chat around this engine shortly, but before we do that, let's have a recap as to how we got here. All right then, Joe, so crank position sensor, where do we need to be looking?
So this is plugged in up there.
Yeah.
Which yours, there should be a bracket holding it all up, but yours is made of rust. It's just completely broken away. I mean, look, there's the remnants of it.
Yeah.
To the state of it. So that's fairly common on cars like this, and the sensor is in the side of the crankcase, just there.
Yeah.
That's where that lead goes.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a 6mm cap head that holds it in at the top, which is probably going to shear off.
Well, yeah, it should take, undo that bolt, pull it out. But the first problem he's encountered is the bolt sheared off in the engine, and this bit's still stuck in there as well.
And that's why the engine had to come out. So Joe got to work disassembling the 996, while Chris dug out the holy clipboard of doom to begin forming a list of parts we were going to need for a job which, in a few minutes, went from a sensor swap to a heavy maintenance exercise. This is the first time this 911's engine has been out in 26 years to my knowledge, and it fought hard against Joe's efforts to get it out, which didn't help with quarter-century old component breaking like the throttle cable. What needs replacing, sorry?
These pipes here, this one, it's basically been on there so long it's stuck to it, and I'm trying to get it off. You can hear it tearing, starting to tear.
At least the engine mounts held out, as sometimes these fail when removing the engine, but mine were replaced around 2 years ago and happen to be in good condition still. At last though, the M96 was free of its engine mounts and ready to depart the rear of a shell it's called home for 26 years and which has been driven hard for the last 5. Wow. And there we are, sports fans. I actually can't believe that's it, to be fair. There she blows. So, identifiable bits, Joe, that you're seeing. Air oil separator you mentioned straight away.
Well, as we've got it out, yeah, it's crazy not to change it. I mean, as you can see, all the fittings that hold the pipes on are absolutely about to snap, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
The general corrosion, all on the fuel rails is...
Yeah. And this, when that's in there, that is just...
You can change the position. It's so difficult. It's easy to do it now, isn't it?
Yeah.
All these sort of brackets that hold all your sensor, because up there that's all just corroded to nothing. It disappeared. Obviously with your starter motor, it's not very healthy either, so it's easy to change it now anyway. I mean, it's not that difficult in position, but probably once you can change this in position again, but it's just easier now.
Much easier when it's out. What is that?
It's the oil pressure sender. So they're prone to giving a false reading. I mean, like I said, it's really quite simple to do it in position, but it's even easier now. But you can generally tell by the corrosion, this is what they sort of suffer from, so when you need to take anything apart, it all shears off.
Yeah.
I mean,
which we're used to with this,
which we're used to in 996s, yeah.
Yeah. Quality. Cheers, Joe.
No worries. So, this is the famous brake pop across to the top of the gearbox.
Yeah.
Generally, it's not too bad.
So, gearbox is off. What are we saying, Joe, with that clutch?
I mean, it's close to the rivets, real close. I mean, yeah, it's probably got, well, but I'd be changing it, to be honest.
Yeah. Should we change it, shall we?
Well, it's your car, I would.
Yeah, let's do it. Add to the list.
We need to order a clutch for this.
With the engine out, that lodged crank position sensor could now be extracted, though even then it needed some heat and a quality set of shades to set it free.
Alright.
One of the problems this car was having was on startup, sometimes like there would be like a shriek from the motor basically, and you've said clear evidence of that.
But there's clear evidence where it's not been engaging in the ring gear properly. Yeah, which is fairly common.
Okay.
I mean, you've had a start melt on this, so it should have lasted slightly longer, but as is everything these days. And there was that in the bell housing as well, which
answers on a postcard.
I don't know where that's come from, but it was in there.
One of the things we're replacing while the engine's out, just because it's easier, one of the many jobs, is replacing this starter motor. So maybe 6 months ago on startups, not always cold to be fair, in fact more often than not it was when the engine was warm rather than cold, but turning it over and it would make this weird sort of shriek just on startup for like a second, and then that'd be it. You basically just need a new starter motor. Now, this was the motor that was put in, so this was the problematic starter motor in question. It was made by Bosch. This went in about a week before the COVID lockdown, so as we record now, it's pretty much exactly 4 years ago. In that time, the car has done around about 60,000 miles. So, look, I always try and advocate responsible kind of purchasing, and I tend to find that if you buy cheap, you buy twice. So basically what I'm trying to say is I usually try to spend the right money on proper parts with longevity in mind, and that's why I bought Bosch. However, I feel like the quality of this has been pretty poor. Again, to last only 4 years and 60,000 miles, again, it is pretty poor. That's my ownership experience. The trouble is, if Bosch is meant to be the high standard, I don't want to fit something else because I don't want the next starter motor to last less than that. So that's the dilemma we've got. It just seems that anything these days, just even if it's quality stuff, in my experience, it's just not built to last. While Chris began sourcing prompt Porsche parts for the newly discovered jobs, Joe began replacing the discs and pads all round, which was a job we'd planned, as these were ready for retirement. As usual, I went for my preferred setup of factory discs and EBC yellow stuff pads. Cool. So, Chris, it's the thing I never wanted to see, but of which you said was inevitable. The engine is out.
Yeah, unfortunately for you, yeah. In your case, it was the worst case scenario, the bolt snap that holds it in, and it was so corroded around the sensor that it actually gripped onto it and it broke. We couldn't get the sensor out, it broke the sensor trying to remove it. And just where it is when it's in the car, you just got you've got very bad access. So you can't really get to it to sort it out. So hence it coming out. We have found other problems as well, as we expected. There's a lot of remedial work.
That's the big thing to point out, isn't it? That like this is all very tightly packaged in a really small space in there. So whilst, you know, sometimes you can do certain things when the engine's in, and just getting it out, you can do more things that are quicker and easier with better access.
Some things are impossible, and some things it just makes it a lot easier to do it when it's out. For example, the oil air separator and the oil pressure sender. You'd normally be struggling up here somewhere, but with a lot of, you know, things in the way.
Yeah.
It's not that's 5 minutes or less. You know, it's one.
Yeah.
It's a couple of little bits to do. You know, down there, a few minutes, probably like 20 minutes, half an hour when it's in the car.
Yeah.
The brake pipe, you know, here, you can do it by getting the gearbox out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a gearbox out job.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a safety thing.
So it's worth pointing out, so we're not going to change that this time, even though, you know, we could, but the guys think, you know, there's a couple of areas
of corrosion on there. We're going to clean that up. If we're worried about it, we will change it.
Yeah.
I think that will clean up and we can treat that. We've got to also think about budget.
Yes.
And so we have a sensible conversation with the client about what to do, what not to do.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, though, we are changing that brake pipe.
Yeah. Yeah. I also want to point out that that is a mat, and it's not anything more serious than that. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, look, everything else then generally, like condition-wise, Chris, with this, I mean, you know, like again,
it is pretty horrible.
Yeah.
But it's not what I would I'm not surprised for how hard and how often it's used. You drive it in all the salt, you abuse it. I'd be in the car with you. You don't mess around.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's got a lot of corrosion on it, which these engines do suffer with. You know, there's a lot of rust on the fuel rail. It is going to need it's going to need a lot of attention soonish. It's a bit like, where do you stop now, unless you change everything? So,
well, look, that's the thing. I'm going to pop this back on here.
If we had a rear main seal leak or, you know, an intermediate shaft bearing cover plate seal leak, we would be changing that. They're okay. They're a bit of an annoying part of the engine. We tend, sort of the way we approach it, if they're not leaking, we leave them alone, because they've changed them. The rear main seal, I think, on like 11th iteration, they're just a sod. You can put a new one in and it will leak.
Still not be right, yeah.
So if it's not, our opinion is if it's not leaking, leave it alone. So we've inspected that, we're happy with that. We'd be looking at the oil cooler here to see if there's at the back, another one at the back of the engine, see if it's got any coolant leaks. This one hasn't. Just anything, you know, that would be awkward.
That methodology has really hit home, because it just is easier to do things. So even though, like, in the short term, there's obviously going to be a cost involved with all of this.
Yeah, it probably sounds more like, your mechanic's just trying to sell you more, you know, do more sales. But it would be better from a business point of view to have it out again in 6 months and then do something else. But obviously we don't want to do that. We want to create, you know, a good relationship with our client. Say, you know, I would advise you change this now.
Yeah.
You don't have to,
yeah,
but it's a good idea to. Hopefully we won't be having it out for a long time.
So here it is then, this is the end of day one at Right Tune. There's really been a hell of a lot of work going on here, because as well as the engine coming out, Joe's been busy putting new discs and pads on the car as well, and we've got a few other bits and pieces going on, so lots to be done still, but a lot of progress made. I guess I just wanted to do like a bit of bonus footage really to say, well look, it's a bit weird seeing the engine out, because this thing has, as I said to Chris, powered me all over the place really. 71,000 miles in 4.5 years. This has taken me to 11 different countries. God knows how many track days, maybe 20, a couple of hill climbs, but then on top of that, it's done a lot of boring stuff like day-to-day driving. I live on the south coast, I live near the sea, so there's a lot of salt in the air, and it's that kind of thing, bear in mind it's used all year round as well, that's probably a bit more telling as to its condition. So the engine, condition-wise, is by no means perfect. It's still working, but obviously it's not a concourse example, but I kind of don't mind that. I'm a real evangelist for these cars, as you know. I just think they're awesome. I think they're great value for money and so much Porsche for the cash, basically. And again, all these fantastic memories that really this engine has given me, you know, for elementary money when we're talking about Porsches. So I'm sure there is other examples in the world that have done maybe the same amount of mileage in the time as me, but maybe that would more than likely be for like commuting and stuff. I'd be surprised if someone is use the car harder, I guess, and that's kind of not a willy waving sort of statement or anything like that. That's just kind of how it is. And in being a real bastion for these cars and my belief that they're awesome, I'm kind of keen to prove their worth. So as part of that kind of ongoing Carrera diary, really, I don't mind showing you the warts and all scenario of where we're at, because I think it's all kind of part of the merit of running these. So this is kind of some of the misting that Chris has pointed out. We've seen some rust as well on the fuel line, even little stuff again that you might not appreciate. You know, where these engines are situated in the back of these 911s, they're tightly packaged, where there's a lot of heat at play, constantly parts getting hot and cold. Again, factor in mitigating circumstances like where I live in the world, and there's inevitable corrosion, really. And when this engine is shoehorned in the back of the car, these sorts of things and these sorts of jobs are extremely difficult for technicians to execute effectively. So again, in having it out, these are things that you can assess in the cold light of day, I guess, really. So yeah, that is the walk around of the car. Back box is looking all right, to be fair. But yeah, that's, as I said, the warts and all kind of situation with the flat six. It is, as I said, it's very weird to see it sitting out there, but it's given me so many great memories. I can't wait to just get this back in there and crack on and make even more. Day 2 started with a conundrum. My uprated clutch to support the CSR single mass flywheel, which I love, needed replacing. And RPM Technic were the only ones with the part on the shelf, so a 2-hour round trip was necessary to get the spring-centred friction disc I needed, though there was time to have a quick coffee and admire the metal in the RPM Technic showroom. Back at Right Tune, Joe had cracked on installing a new throttle cable, as well as an air oil separator, plus outfit shaft flange seals on the gearbox, before I tipped up rocking the spring-centred friction disc from RPM.
The reason the ordinary clutch has got a rigid one is because it has a dual mass, which takes some of the vibration out of it and the harsh take-up. Yeah. When you go single mass flywheel, you want sprung centre to take some of that out. You can run it like that, but
it's very harsh, yeah. I do. Joe put the new clutch on and talked it all up before reconnecting the gearbox. Just before the engine goes back in quickly, I want to say that these KW Variant 3s were fitted around 3 years ago. It's part of their Inox line, which is like anti-rust. And again, like the environment where the car lives is pretty harsh, daily driven, etc. And there's not a mark on it. I had Bilsteins on a previous 996, and after the first winter, they were looking pretty sorry for themselves. But these V3s are standing up well. Then it was time for the remarriage of powertrain and car before connecting everything back up. And before you ask, I've no idea what that is hanging from the car either. In just 2 days, the project was wrapping up, Joe hammering the car and Chris hammering the calculator. By late afternoon, and following my customary 5k miles oil change, the 911 was back together, engine firing and out testing on the road. A job well done. Right, so there it is, it's done. I just want to point out that I've got 2 microphones for YouTube. One of them's died, so that's why we're using the podcast stuff. So as long as you know that, that's great. I'm joined by Joe, who's done all of this work in 2 days. So Joe, a massive thank you, mate.
No problem.
Absolutely, you're looking the least stressed I've seen you in 2 days, to be fair.
It is what it is, isn't it? Cars, they're all a pain in the arse.
Chris has got the clipboard of doom, the holy clipboard of doom. Thank you, mate. Here it is. So this is the list of everything that Joe has done. I'm surprised the bill's not under there, Chris, to be honest, so that's good.
How many noughts?
Yeah. Yeah, there was an added time pressure associated with this that you wouldn't normally have.
Yeah, I wouldn't normally try and do a job like this in 2 days. I mean, especially with all the stuff we've had to get undone and replace. I mean, we've been going at it. Yeah. Obviously for you.
So, shall I read out a couple of bits of kind of what's been done? So, the reason for the car coming in, as everybody knows, was that crank position sensor replacement. We know why the engine needed to come out in order to get that done. So that did lead to the engine removal. It's had a new clutch, as the inspection showed. It was on the rivets. That led to a whole merry-go-round trying to find the parts to go with the flywheel.
Yeah, driving halfway around the world to try and get a centre plate for it. But
Yeah, because in running the lightweight flywheel, the CSR flywheel from RPM Technic, that I really wanted to keep because we had to have not a rigid friction disc basically, but one with springs in the middle. One with
springs in the centre. I mean, you could have run just an ordinary clutch disc without the springs in it, like comes with an ordinary 911 with a dual mass, but it makes the take-up and horrible.
Yeah.
Drivability is really not that good. So it's not amazing with the sprung centre in it, but it's a lot better than without it.
Well, it was an example, wasn't it, of because at the start of yesterday, no one was really thinking we'll change the clutch. It might have happened, but you know.
It wasn't really on the agenda, was it? Because you didn't say there was no sort of clutch issues, was it? So no, it wasn't on the agenda really. But
just kind of lucky because you said there's not much life left in that. So
no, I mean you've got a few track days coming up and such. I don't think you would have. Like I said, it was on the rivets on one side of it, so you'd have started slipping soon,
fairly quickly.
Fairly soon, to be fair.
So that led to a merry-go-round of parts, which was interesting and a bit of an eye-opener as to the actual availability of parts. And like the guys here at specialists here at Right Tune and elsewhere, like it's a genuine struggle at times to get parts, which has opened my eyes. So air oil separator, a whilst you're there job. Throttle cable replaced. It was found to have damage on removal. Rear anti-roll bar bushes done. Coolant hose. Fuel leak rectified. Gearbox oil leak. Oil pressure sender. We also changed the discs and pads, but I think that was mainly I feel like there was more than that.
Yeah, it was. As you know, getting all these bits apart is not always straightforward. So that's what takes a lot of the time. A lot of those jobs can be done with the engine in position. It's just easier when the engine's out, isn't it? We changed the start mode. Did you mention that?
No, we didn't. Yeah, starter
motor as well. So you popped the starter motor on it.
I was surprised with how quickly it kind of all came out, really, because it was like done in the morning. But like, it's an engine in a small space, lots of hot and cold, a lot of corrosion, I guess.
There's a lot of corrosion. There's lots of things you have to take off as well. Like even things like the bumper fittings, they all corrode. I mean, yours are quite lucky, but at times you have to grind the things off, and it all just takes time. I mean, if it all was to come apart like a brand new car, it's not that problematic, but it's not a brand new car anymore, is it?
Yeah. Well, this is
British weather has got hold of it, and it's rusty.
Yeah. How kind of I think it's worth kind of pointing out that's kind of part of the difficulty of the job. It makes your job more difficult. Is battling that corrosion.
A lot of the time you're battling undoing things. I mean, like I said, if it all just flies to pieces like it should do, it's no drama, but it just doesn't happen. I know the customer wants you to go, it's just going to undo, but 9 times out of 10 it's a problem.
Yeah.
Not always. I mean, like I said, we had a Boxster in a few weeks ago. I mean, it was quite untidy underneath, and the sensor that we changed, the crankshaft sensor, just popped straight out of it.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And yours has been an absolute nightmare. So
For again, like where we've done things a little bit different. So what would like the normal protocol be? Obviously, it wouldn't all be like race to get all the parts and it's got to be done in 2 days. So I know things would take a little bit longer, but like in terms of putting it back together and testing or whatever, what would be different to what we've done today?
Not too much different, really. I mean, yours we just basically sped up. It was on fast forward. Do you know what I mean? We would have normally we would have got the engine out, we'd have had a look, see what parts need changing, we'd have discussed with the customer, they'd have made their mind up. By the time that's how it happened, they've made their mind up. There's normally a day involved, then you order the parts, and that's another day. And so really, it's just waiting for people to make decisions and parts to turn up.
Yeah.
You were like, I was just, this needs change, and you were just like, straight away. So the parts were just, it was instant, wasn't it? But yes, it's basically sort of that sort of story, really.
How, because obviously a couple of things snowballed here in terms of like, the new clutch, again, from my point of view, was unexpected.
Yeah.
How, like in percentage terms, how often does the engine out project snowball? I guess most of the time.
Most of the time. I mean, like I said, yours has had engine mounts before, so they just undone. I mean, a car that's 20 years old never had engine mounts. Every time, when you go to undo them, it basically pulls the stud out the centre of the mount, and it's knackered, it leaks.
Yeah.
So things like that, I mean, they all, to be honest with you, they nearly always snowball. Maybe on different levels, but it always tends to be worse than the customer first
Yeah.
wants it to be, unfortunately.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
best as you don't want it to go that way.
Is that, I guess, like last question is, because this would relate to 996 and 997 and Boxster equivalents as well, would anything be different for Tiptronic examples? Obviously, there's no clutch to change.
No, there's no clutch to change. But if I had to do what I needed to do on yours to get the sensor out, it would have been getting the gearbox off of a Tiptronic's more involved. It's not massively difficult. It's just more involved. You want to do the torque converter and then take the box off and then take the drive plate off if you need to get access to anything. So yeah, Tiptronics they make certain jobs impossible as well. I mean, for instance, if we needed to do like a rear brake pipe that goes over the gearbox on yours, you just take the gearbox out in position. You can't do that with an auto, so you've got to take the whole thing out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a simple job like that on a manual makes it a marathon on a Tiptronic.
Yeah, yeah. And look, we left the IMS alone. That was like completely dry.
Yeah, she
and
was
whatnot.
dry, so there was no real need to tamper with it, to be honest.
Okay, so that's good advice.
Yeah,
then.
I
Just-
do. I tend to, if it's dry, I leave them alone because I have changed them in the past because the customer wants you to. You change it and it leaks again. Not necessarily straight away, but they're coming a year later for a service and it's weeping again. So if it is dry, I tend to leave it alone. Yeah.
Fantastic. Look, Joe, I won't keep you any longer. I know, that it's been a long 2 days. You're dying for a beer, which is kind of absolutely fair play,
It's
mate.
it's 5:45, Lee. I'm
It's
on overtime now.
It's on double time. Mate, thank you so much for doing that and thanks for
It's
sharing
absolutely no
your
worries.
expertise
Thank you very
as
much.
well.
Cheers,
Quality,
Lee.
mate.